Reflections in Time is made possible in part by support from the UNO Alumni Association, fostering a legacy of alumni giving since 1913.
More than 25 years ago, the interview series called Reflections in Time was developed by the late Professor Paul Borghi. It was intended to preserve some of the history of the University of Nebraska at Omaha by recording experiences of faculty and others who contributed to its development. With the aid of the UNO Alumni Association, I've continued Paul's work with the series. My name is Jack Newton. I'm retired now, but I'm still active as a professor emeritus. I've been on the faculty of UN Omaha since 1960, and I served for 20 years as Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences. I worked closely with Professor Borghi in developing his original interview series, and I continue it as a tribute to him. It's a bright sunny afternoon in October, the year is 2006, and we have as our guest today Jim Leslie, I guess I could call you a long-time president and CEO of the UNO Alumni Association, and you've recently retired as president and CEO, but you're still active, I understand, until the end of the year in sort of an advisory capacity. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Well, we're really glad to have you here, Jim.
Thank you.
I've known you for a long time, and I think we're going to have fun doing this interview today. You'll be able to talk. You've been here longer than I have. I'm trying to think. You may be the only person I've interviewed who's been at the university longer than I have. If you count your time as a student here.
Right.
Of course, you're still a young man, so...
right.
Although I've said I've known you a long time, I don't think I've ever talked to you about your roots, where you grew up. Since you went here to UNO, I'm presuming you probably are from this area. Are you from Omaha? Or?
Born and raised in Omaha. Was actually born at the old St. Joseph Hospital down on 10th Street.
Oh, I remember that quite well.
Yeah. And went to Columbia grade school, which was on 38th Avenue in Jones. We lived at 45th and Jones down by La Casa Pizzeria.
Really?
And
it's still there.
It's still there. And
I don't know whether we're giving them a commercial plug here or what now, but
nope, it's still there. And my mother lived in that home for about 40 years and grew up coming out. We used to. I remember in my early years as a child, we would come out here, and there was a tunnel underneath Dodge Street. And it was where the creek ran down through there, and as boys, a big hoot was to walk, well, you could actually walk through that tunnel going under Dodge Street, and today you'd never think about doing something like that, but we did back then. And the early years of my activity out here as a young man growing up in this neighborhood.
And then where'd you go to high school?
Central.
Good for you.
Yeah.
I have 3 children that went to Central, so I have to root for it a little bit anyhow.
Well, met my wife there, and actually our son teaches down there now economics at Central High, which is
wonderful.
Rather amazing when I think about it.
So you entered the university, and back then it was the Municipal University of Omaha,
right.
and we most often called just Omaha University.
Right.
And that was back in 1959.
Right.
So that you were a year before I arrived on the scene here. Tell me a little bit about what it was like back then.
Well, we had the field house here. The library, well, it's called the administration building now, but the Epley building, I think that opened in '55. The year, we called it the Applied Arts building, which they call the engineering building now. I think that opened a little before I got here, but the Student Center opened in January, I believe, of 1960, the first year, my freshman year.
That was the year of the big snow.
Yes.
1960, winter of 1960.
Right. I remember I was supposed to take final exams on whatever day that was, and it was delayed a whole week, I believe, because of the snowstorm that came through. But I think those were the only buildings that, well, we had the Quonset huts, the shack was still here, so it was a far...
That was the one in what is it, just south of the
administration
building,
right.
And it had a cafeteria in
right.
it and things like that.
Yeah. And that closed, obviously, when the Student Center opened then in January of 1960. So parking was an issue back then, as it is now, but obviously a very small campus as compared to what we see today.
We had parking meters back then.
Right. And the big trick back then was you took a water gun and you would squirt the meter and freeze it so that it was like a quarter for I don't know how many hours, but you'd put your quarter in and then fill it full of water and hope it freeze, and then it wouldn't operate after that.
Now you're telling some secrets that I've never heard before.
Well, Don Flaster was the Dean of Students. He didn't appreciate that back in those years. But anyway, it was a different time.
Well, I remember when I first came here, people telling me about how busy the campus has been with all of the dedications of new buildings and so on. And all, you just mentioned that many of these opened up between 1955 and 1960.
Right. No, Milo Bale was the president back then of the university, and he really had done a marvelous job of relating to the community, and he it was after I graduated, but he was named, or maybe it was, I don't remember what the year was, but he was King of Exarban.
Yeah, I think it was before, because I don't remember that, even though I'd been told about it.
Yeah. But he really had a great interrelationship with the community, and you could see that. I was doing a tour today with our graduating class of 1956, and love to tell the story about Milo, and he had gotten Gene Epley to, I think it was $750,000 that he made a contribution for what was the Gene Epley Library. Well, none of that money actually ended up going into the library. It all went into the Milo Bale Student Center, which was developed.
But it was not Milo Bale Student Center back then.
No, I think Paul Kennedy and some others were very instrumental in getting that name put on there. But the irony of it all struck me as being pretty good at that point in time. But he was a very dynamic individual, and a little different than what you see today in administration. He was pretty much the do-as-I-say kind of guy, but he got a lot of good things done.
Well, Dr. Bale and I were good friends, and I appreciated the fact that he was able to keep this place alive with a minimum amount of money.
Yeah, you're right.
And I'll never forget the first year I was here, back, and that was, I mentioned the big snow, 1959-60, that year. In 1960-61, we didn't have much snow. And what happened was that they budgeted enough to handle another big snow, but they had, come spring, they had money left over. And you know what happened to that money?
Nope.
Faculty got a bonus.
Ooh.
And I was so surprised, and I guess other people were too, but Dr. Bale said, you folks have earned this, we can't pay you enough, so we have some money left over, we're giving you a bonus. So that, you know, that's just another little insight into Bale's character.
He used to interview all of the new people coming on campus too. If you didn't pass muster with him, you didn't get hired.
Oh, my interview was fun. I really enjoyed it. This is about you, so I'm not going to go into details about what my interview was like, but I enjoyed it, and I made out quite well financially as a result of it. During my tenure here as a student, I was student council president back there, or student body president, and
The year I graduated in 1963, we had a mill levy opportunity, and the university is a municipal university. There was property tax that went for Omaha University. Well, we wanted that increase from like 1 mil to 2 mil. Well, we had an aggressive campaign and were not successful with it, and it was obviously very disappointing, and part of what led to the eventual merger in the University of Nebraska system in 1968. But Milo sent me after that, and after my tenure on the student council, a letter indicating that he felt very positive about me, and that's one of those things that I cherished and had on my wall over in the alumni office for all the time that I've been there. It's those things really mean something.
That was a disappointment, that mill levy campaign, especially since it was really for a tiny amount.
Right.
And when you consider, well, look at what's financed partly by tax dollars now, like the community college in Omaha, many times what we were getting as a municipal university.
I heard, and I don't know if this is true, that there were a number of municipal universities around the country, and Wichita down in Kansas had a mill levy, and then they became Wichita State. But they were able to keep their mill levy and as well as state support, and that would have been neat for us. But the taxpayers weren't interested in doing that, I guess.
Well, we had, if I remember correctly, 2 mill levy campaigns.
Yeah, there was another one after
the 1963 campaign, and that was unsuccessful as well.
Yeah, and Milo, I think, retired in like 1965.
65, right.
Yeah, so it was over for him, but it was very dynamic individual. And
well, you were very active on campus as a student then.
I was a fraternity member, Pi Kappa Alpha, and I worked, though, all the time I was going to school at a service station over by La Casa, and then got involved with student government and so forth. And you were the same way. I'm sure you look back on those years and wonder, where'd all the energy come from? And how did you get everything done? But
you don't have that much energy anymore?
No. But it was fun, and we lived close to campus, and I'll never forget, I took a summer school course or two, and Fran Hurst was he was a psychologist.
Dr. Francis Hurst, yes, a good friend of mine.
He had, I don't know what the course was, but it was 7:30 in the summer. I'd get out of the rack at like 7:15 and be sitting in his class. Boy, unbelievable what young people will do. But different times, but it was fun.
Well, we've talked a little bit about what the university was like back then. Was there an alumni association back then?
I was with her here half hour ago. Betty Davis was the alumni director, and yes. And they were officed over in the Student Center on the 2nd floor. And they had an office over there. And we've been around since 1913, really. The Alumni Association was formed June 6, 1913, the first graduating class. They had dinner after graduation. And they formed the Alumni Association, and its purpose, I love this statement, was to upbuild the university. You don't hear anybody saying that now, but upbuild the university. And it got started then, didn't have a full-time, or even not a full-time, didn't have a paid secretary until Olga Strimple did it in the mid-40s. And I love that name. She named her boy Thor, that just sounds like, what God of War, Thor Strimple, and he was an alum too, neat young man. But Olga she was president a time or two, and ended up being secretary, and it was housed back in those early years in the administration building. But then when the Student Center opened in '60, they moved over to the Student Center and stayed there until we then moved in 1970, before I came back, over to the old Stores Mansion. And we were in...
Betty by that time was no longer...
Was gone, yeah. Warren Whittekind would have been the alumni director, boy, after her. Well, there was more than one after her. Well, Warren came, and then his name will come to me in a minute, senility set in, but we had lost our alumni director in '72 right after Ron Roskins came. And Ron and I had been elected to the board of directors for the Alumni Association after graduation. I was working at Mutual of Omaha at the time, and Ron and I were attending the same church, First Central Congregational Church, and we were looking for a new alumni director, and they had interviewed 3 or 4 people, and for one reason or another they weren't hired. And Ron made the indication to me that, Jim, you're just the kind of guy we need to have for that responsibility, and with your background as a student and what you're doing in the community and so forth, you ought to think about it. Well, I talked to my wife Nancy, who's also a graduate, and who came out, and Rich Thompson at the time was the president of the Alumni Association, and Rich and I were fraternity brothers, a little nepotism involved here, and one thing led to another, and decided that it'd be fun to come back to the university, and it has been a wonderful ride. I mean,
well, you've anticipated one of my questions, which was how you got here as, in your job. Just though maybe it's a digression, but could you kind of elaborate a little bit for me on the titles here? You're retiring, or have retired, as president and CEO.
Correct. But
was that always your title, or
no,
you were director or something?
Right. It started with, as I said, with Olga Strimple. The individual would have been called the secretary of the Alumni Association. At some point, the title was changed to director, and then I was hired as the executive director. Now, that's just a lot of semantics, in that, you know, there were 3 people and 2.5 people in the office, so big, you know, what did that mean? And I was the executive director for a long time, but we've been a non-profit corporation since 1937. And somewhere, I don't remember what year it was, I hadn't been here that long, but the determination was, well, my title should be president and CEO, and I love that, chief executive officer of 3 people or whatever. But anyway, they made that change, and that's what it's been ever since. However, Lee Dinker assumed the responsibility as president effective July 1st, and my title's been changed to president emeritus, which means that and a cup of coffee, or 50 cents or whatever will get you a cup of coffee, I guess. But it's the responsibilities have remained the same. So.
Okay. Now you have a group of alumni as a board of directors.
Correct.
And do they have a president too, or is that just the chairman of the board?
Right, it's chairman of the board, and then there's officers of the board, which would be, there's 2 or 3 vice chairmen, secretary, treasurer, legal counsel, past chair, and incoming chair as well. The association, I reported to a board, not the chancellor or university officials, but there's right now there are 21 directors, and then the officers of the Alumni Association, which constitute the officers constitute the executive committee, and that's who I reported to.
Now, how do the directors get that position? Are they elected?
They're elected at the annual meeting in December every year. We elect them for 3-year terms. 7 individuals for 3-year terms every year. And you can stay on for 2 terms unless you're an officer, and if you're an officer you can stay on a little longer than that. So great. We've just had tremendous success with wonderful people in Omaha.
Oh, I'm aware of that. I've known many of them. In the,
well, even right now we have the postmaster, the police chief, I mean Tom Warren, Eva John Sperling, we've even got a judge now with Patricia Lamberty is there, and I shouldn't single out any individual because I'll forget all the others, and they're just great, great people.
Let's go back for a minute. You graduated in 1963.
Correct.
What degree did you get? What was your major?
In liberal arts or arts and science, I was a history major.
Oh, okay,
and
great.
It fit. And I didn't realize it, but if you're an alumni director, you have to like your institution, number one, but it's history and the people and so on.
Yeah.
And I've always been had a fascination with that. And that's really how we got started with Paul Borghi, with the Reflection in Time series, because he was communications and speech and journalism, and not journalism so much as speech, I think. Broadcasting.
Speech.
But just wanted to preserve the history of this institution. And we've worked closely, too, with Les Valentine in archives,
sure,
and with the historic photograph collection and everything else in that regard. So I thought I would, I also was going to get a, I had a minor in speech, but I wanted to get a teaching certificate as well, because, I mean, if you're a history major, what are you going to do? And so all of my fraternity brothers said I had, you know, I ought to have a teaching opportunity. And I did everything in the College of Education except practice teach. And I decided that that just wasn't really something I wanted to do. So I backed away and thought maybe I would come back or go to law school or whatever. But after graduation, I was in the Army Reserve for 6 months and came back and decided I'd better go to work, and went down to Mutual of Omaha, and was there for 10 years before coming back.
So you had 10 years experience in the real world before you came back to the ivory towers.
Yeah. Well, I think Mutual, I think I profited a whole lot more from that relationship than Mutual. They gave me just a tremendous experience down there. It was good, really good. Mm-hmm. I had an opportunity to do a lot of things I couldn't have done anywhere else.
And so you've told me how you got here back in 1973. Were there any surprises when you took over the job?
The Alumni Association was in debt. I didn't know that. The facilities that we had, and I'll never forget, I can still sense it. We were in the old Adolph Storrs mansion, and it was a little rough, and my mother especially was not happy about me making the decision to come back to UNO. She thought her boy was doing very well at Mutual, and coming back to UNO was not in her plans, and she wasn't terribly excited about it. And I sat there and I thought, oh, what have I done? Why? You know, but that didn't last too long. And
well, I remember that old building. It was in some ways kind of a neat old building, but it was, how shall we say, a little run down.
That's right.
And what we had in there, the geography department was in there for a while, and the radio station was
well, the radio station, KVNO, was on the top floor, because that had started in '72 with Fritz Lee, was that his name? Yeah, and Paul was very involved with that as well. And then CAUR was on the second floor, Center for Applied Urban Research. Geography, the basement was empty when we went over there, and it came later. Right,
they had the remote sensing part of geography was there, not the whole department.
Yeah, so the building was very well utilized, and but it did leave a little to be desired, and but we survived, and it's just a totally different time. When I look back now, it's very interesting, the evolution of the association.
Well, the university was fortunate to acquire that property, I think. And
that was the first.
Yes.
That was Woody Varner. Chi Omega sorority was close to buying it. There are 5 acres over there, but that was the first property as we moved west from the present location here, and the neighbors, I'm sure, were not happy about that, because that meant obviously everything between that property and the university was going to end up being UNO, and it was some tense times.
Yeah, I've often wished that I could have interviewed for this series Rex Engebretson, who was involved in the acquisition of a lot, and he's still around, but he's out in
Denver, isn't he?
Yeah, he's out in no, I think he's in Arizona. I'm not sure.
No, I think you're right, because we had an outreach one time. Oh, it's been a number of years ago. He and I've forgotten his wife's name. Stephanie. She was a neat gal. Were there, but I think you're right. I think he has gone to Arizona.
Yeah, he was in Colorado for a while, working for the Northwestern Bell or something.
You're right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he, I'm sure, would have lots of good stories to tell, and if I can ever catch him for this series, you can bet I will.
Yeah, well, he could make up good stuff too, so that would be fun.
Yeah, I've often regretted also that I didn't have a chance to, well, I tried several times to talk Neil Morganson into being in this series, and he never got around to it. He was always busy, but he'd have some stories about land acquisition to tell also.
Yeah, he was a neat young man. He died much too soon.
Yes,
much too soon.
He was a good friend.
Yeah.
Well, describe your job when you first came on the scene in the Alumni Association.
Well, there were actually there were only two other people in the office. Margaret Bush was here, just a neat young woman, and she was kind of holding the thing together, although, as I indicated, Rich Thompson was president, and he spent hours and hours here because we'd lost our previous alumni director, and he was the guy that had to hold everything together. And then we had a part-time receptionist, and that was it. And when I came, they were principally responsible for just keeping records on our alums at that point. And we determined that, and I'll never forget Ron Roskins indicating that we were receiving $1.40, I think, per name from the university for each alum that we had on our records. That was to help us offset the records expense that we had. And I went to Ron and indicated that this wasn't cutting it. I mean, we weren't going to go very far very fast with this kind of support. And he said, Jimmy, you're just going to have to go out and earn it. We are not about, we don't have the resources to give you the additional support. So in 1975 we started, we had done an annual fund since 1953, but it was a very periodic, we just send out a letter or two every once in a while. In 75 we started a telemarketing program, and that was before telemarketing became the business that it is today. It was phenomenal. It set everything in the right direction for us, and we suddenly had resources then that we'd never had before, and we paid off our obligation. Harold Kefauver was our business guy here back then, and Harold was just a wonderful human being, and he worked with us, and we got that corrected, and with that additional income, primarily through the annual fund, we were able to turn a lot of things around. But it was.
And you used volunteers on the telephone.
Oh yeah, and we'd go down to the old Omaha National Bank building at 17th and Farnham, and we took the whole second floor. And John Furstenberg was down there, and John worked at ONB, and he was our president that year. And I think we'd start like at 7:30 and go till 9:30, and sometimes we'd run anywhere from 80 to 100 people down there calling. And non-previous donors, we'd get 30% of them to say yes, because they'd never been called, never been asked before, and it worked extremely well. And then when we got our own building in '79, we had a club room in that building that we could put 30 phones in, and so we did it out there, and we'd have pizza and pop, and we used to give away ice cream, Baskin & Robbins ice cream certificates if you got a good contribution. And so, no, we had a lot of fun with it. Identified a lot of people that wanted to help us through that. Ended up with a lot of board members coming through that process. So it was just a great program. It isn't functioning now because it became, people kind of got tired of the whole process, and so
I was going to say, I don't think we've had a phone call for a long time. And
well, we use a regular commercial firm now to do calling, and it's just a different situation than it was.
Well, I volunteered one year and made phone calls for you. And wasn't very good at it at all.
Well, I always thought that volunteers, that professionals would do better. Yeah. No, it didn't work that way. Our volunteers just did a fabulous job, and it worked out. And we'd have each night would be like Mutual of Omaha night or Northern Natural and so forth, and it was good. But all those things play out, and it's just a different world now. Telemarketing is just huge. I mean,
was that your idea, or where did it come from?
Oh, I'd like to think it was my idea, but all I ever did was steal from other people, you know. So I think we picked that up from other institutions that were doing the similar kind of thing. And that's the neat thing. We've always belonged. It used to be the American Alumni Council. Now it's called CASE, Council for the Advancement and Support of Education. It's fundraisers, alumni people, and university relations people. And I was very active in the early years with that, and you meet with other alumni people, and what works in Tallahassee may very well work here. And you're not competing because our alums are different than theirs, and so it's just a great organization to find out, you know, how things work.
Now, I think you mentioned in some context or other the meeting with alums in other areas. Are there alumni groups outside of Omaha in many places?
Some organizations have chapters. We've not gone that way because we just didn't have the resources to support them. But we've identified about 8 cities around the country where there are 500 or more of our alums, and try to get there every couple of years. And we have tied in, believe it or not, with baseball. And baseball is still, professional baseball is still relatively cheap, and we've gone, as an example, to Denver and seen the Rockies play, and then we'll have a get-together either at the ballpark or at a sports bar or something close to the ballpark prior to the game, and the chancellor we've taken whoever that might be, Del Weber or Nancy Belk, there. They'll speak at that get-together before the game and then go to the ball game. And the last time we were in Denver, we had 325 people out, I think. We've done it in Phoenix in spring ball during March, and it wasn't hard to talk me into going to Arizona in the springtime. That wasn't tough. We've done a number of, Minneapolis works very well, Kansas City, but those the 8 cities around, you've got Denver, Kansas City, Minneapolis, Chicago, Washington, D.C., Phoenix, and Dallas. Those are the principal areas that our alums have gravitated toward or to.
Interesting. Now, one of the big groups at the university when I first came here were the military people, the bootstrapper, so-called. Do you have many bootstrapper alumni?
There are about 12,000 that graduated, and it used to be they constituted a bigger percentage of our alumni body. Sue Girding, who manages our records department, I think she's got, probably 85 to 90,000 names on our file right now, so it's not as big as it once was, but they've been very supportive. Most of those people, it's totally different now in the military. A lot of those guys and gals are going in with college degrees, but back then they did not. And once they obtained that college degree, their advancement, we used to say that we had more general officers than, except for West Point, and than any other institution in the country.
Yeah, I think that was true back, there was, I remember, a 25th anniversary celebration for the beginnings of the bootstrap program.
Right.
And that was something that, I guess, Dr. Bale and General LeMay worked out together, didn't they?
Right. And it was a super program for us, and these people, for the most part, have very positive feelings about Omaha U or UNO because we accepted their courses that they'd taken other places, and I think we actually gave them credit for some of life's experiences. And they got their degree, and then in many instances their careers really took off as far as the military goes, and it was good. Plus Dr. Bale wanted them here because they paid non-resident tuition, and it was.
Well, they were great students. I enjoyed them very much at the time.
I didn't as a student. These guys were here to study. They were
You
serious.
mean they were a little bit more competitive than you were?
They were terrible. And if a professor graded by the curve, it was even worse because they were.
Their careers depended on it.
Oh yeah.
And they knew it. And yours may have depended on it too, but you didn't know it at the time.
I didn't. No, you're right. I was not good in that sense.
No, they were known as curve breakers. I guess.
But they were.
But they were great students.
Very mature.
Early.
And, yeah, and and my guess is they tested the faculty as well, because you got that older person, and they're not going to play games. They're here to learn. So no, it was a great experience.
Well, we've been talking on and off about fundraising here. Maybe you can help clarify something for me that I'm sure a lot of people don't understand. What's the relationship in the raising and management of funds between the Alumni Association and the University of Nebraska Foundation?
We've had the Alumni Association has had an annual fund program since 1953. And back until, well, we not only generated annual gifts, but we would ask people to put the university and or the Alumni Association in their will, or if they wanted to make a major contribution, they could make it through the Alumni Association. When we became part of the University of Nebraska system in 1968, the University of Nebraska Foundation assumed a fundraising role for UNO at that time, primarily with major gifts and planned gifts, wills and so forth, and corporate giving. They were very aggressive in that regard. And we continued through 1995 to chase alumni and ask for their participation with the annual fund program. In '95, then, it was determined that we would provide the foundation thorough records of our alums. So they, since 1995, have also had all of the information we have about our alums, names, addresses, and that sort of thing. We have continued since '95 with our annual fund program to support the Alumni Association and limited scholarships. But the foundation since '95 has been asking our alums to participate in what they call the college fund program. So I, as an arts and science major, they would ask me to help out with my college with arts and science. And or if I was going to do a will or estate planning, they were the individuals that I would talk with. Or if I wanted to do an endowed scholarship or professorship, major gift, I would work with the foundation to get that done. We do our telemarketing program, which we still do for the first 6 months of the year with our alums. The foundation then will go back to our alumni and ask them for college fund dollars the remaining 6 months of the year.
Well, I suppose your telemarketing program helps you get that information about where the students or former students live, and so on.
Yeah, we have good addresses now on a little over 70,000 people. And when I say we have 85 to 90,000 records, we have a number of those that have passed away. I don't know what, it's several thousand. Plus there's always seems to be some unknowns out there. Although today it's harder and harder to be unknown in this country. If you have a credit card, somebody knows where you're at. And that information's available. I mean, companies sell that.
Just get on the internet. And,
oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you look up Jack Newton, I mean, it's amazing what Google that name, and ooh, it's scary sometimes how much information's out there on all of us. So
a question: you supply the foundation with information. Do they pay you more than $1.40 a name?
They give us $144,000 a year, and they've been doing that since 1996.
Well, I'm glad that's increased a little bit from what you used to.
No, it hasn't. No, it was. That's a bone of contention. We've gotten the same amount for 10 years. So, in fact, we still get just $1.50 a name from the university, and we've talked to them about increasing that because obviously our costs have gone up considerably, but I haven't had much success. Jimmy, go away. But we're very grateful for the support we do get, and I'm not complaining, and I don't think the association is either.
Well, I was surprised when I first became dean to find out some of the things that you did back then, and I presume some of them at least still continue. For example, you were very, very helpful with new faculty members and other, old faculty members too, who needed an advance of some money for some reason. Maybe they were going on an official university trip and they'd be reimbursed, but they didn't have the money that they had to put up front, in order to cover their cost of their hotel room or something, and you'd and the Alumni Association would give them interest-free loans at that point. Do you still do that sort of thing?
We have a travel advance program, right?
Yeah.
And we've done this for years. And
that was something I presume not a whole lot of people know about as far as what Alumni Association does. I mean, probably people that belong to the, you know, are officers of the association or something do, but and obviously deans and others that work with the association do.
No, that's a nice perk, because sometimes you can, traveling and representing the university, you can spend a lot of money, and you may not be reimbursed for some time.
Yeah, so it was very, very helpful. I know. And if you're going to a scientific conference or something like that, it may cost you something for that hotel room that you've got to pay for up front.
No, that's been a good program. We, with the Alumni Association, and I've always thought of us as having 5 or 6 different responsibilities in doing that upbuild for the university. And one of them we've talked about, fundraising. We had to generate income, because we've been a quasi-independent organization, in that we get our budget, operating budget right now is probably $1.2 million a year. Well, we generate a lot of that. Obviously, we get some support from the university and some from the foundation, but a lot of it is through annual fund income, through investment income, through activity income, and so forth, through royalty income that I'll explain in a minute. But old Bill Thompson, who I don't know that he'd want me referring to him as a mentor, but he was one of the first people that knocked on my door when I came back to the campus, indicated that we needed multiple sources of income. Because if one gets in trouble, you've got to do something different. And so we've been having fun in that regard, and we've needed that income to support the association, and annual fund being a big part of that. The other things we do with the alumni building, and again, the building named after Bill and Dorothy Thompson. And I asked the group today who is Bill Thompson's son-in-law, and you know, you get a lot of does. And Warren Buffett, which is absolutely correct. But that building has been our identity ever since we moved in. Well, in that building in 1980, it has been. You know, people think about us because you see it coming down Dodge Street, 67th and Dodge, the Thompson Alumni Center, and we'll put 40,000 to 50,000 people through that front door every year, and for us, that's a big number. And it just, a lot of, if you talk about an alumni center in this town, my guess is most people think of the Thompson Alumni Center. That's a big part of what we do. Communications then too. We have the alumni magazine. It started out, we were looking at the previous titles, and it was Omaha Indian. Well, politically you'd get killed doing naming, because we were the Omaha Indians. You know, you can't do that now. It was that, it had that title, and then it was UNO Today, and it was the Omaha Gate, or the Alumni Gateway for a while, and we've had different names, but we mail that out to 70,000 people quarterly now, and Anthony Flott, who is our editor, just does a magnificent job with it. And now we're incorporating the colleges. The colleges have pages in there. Your old College of Arts and Science, I think, has like 4 pages every issue. And that's neat, because it really... yeah,
I've always thought you did a very good job with that magazine.
But it's the only communication that our alums have with the university, because the university's not sending anything out. So it's a very, very important part of what we do. What holds all of the alumni stuff together, though, is our records area. And this has been our responsibility since 1913.
Now, I presume you have that all computerized now.
It used to be on a mainframe down in Lincoln, but Dick Snowden, who you remember here, was doing
Director of Computing.
Yeah, Director of Computing here. He felt very strongly that we could manage that here on campus in the alumni office. And about 1990, we bought that's when we got the equipment. We've got a network over there, and the software became available that we could manage it. And Sue Girding and the young women that she has working with her over there just does a fabulous job. And again, she's got 90,000 records there that we manage. She can do lists, labels, manage all of that right in the alumni office. And she gets a lot of requests from deans, directors, whoever, for all kinds of information on their graduates, and that's part of what we provide for that $1.50 per name from the university. So just does a magnificent job in that regard. The other area is what we do with activities, and this weekend we've got homecoming, and I made reference to the class of '56 coming back. They're here this weekend, and we will do...
That's the Golden Circle?
Yeah, every month. We got started with this a number of years ago. We'd have an annual lunch or dinner with the 50-year class. Well, the ones that live here in Omaha said, hey, we want to get together once a month. And so we will do that over in our building. They have lunch, and we'll bring somebody from the faculty. Tom Gutierrez was in today to talk about international stuff, and they'll come back every month, and it's just a good situation for us. Okay. And
let's go back and talk about the Thompson Alumni Center a little bit. How did that come to be? I mean, that used to be the old, they used to call it the Shirley House originally, right? And that was acquired by the Alumni Association. How did that happen?
We bought that in 1979. Mrs. Shirley was living there, and her kids were grown and gone, and she had I think there were 11 bedrooms in that house, and she was rambling around in it all by herself. And she had 3 children at that time. They wanted her out, and she had been there for 55 years. The home had been a wedding present from her parents in 1924, and this was 1979, and so she wanted $160,000 for the property in that house, and we talked her down to $150,000. And I went to her, and I tried to talk her into just giving it to us, and we'd call it the Shirley Alumni House. She wasn't interested in doing that at that point in time, so we paid $150,000, and we had tried earlier to buy. Dr. Connors had a property right south of what's our current library, and we tried to get that property, and because we felt we needed our own place. And but we weren't successful in getting that done, and that ended up eventually being bought by the university, which was wonderful.
Well, how was the Alumni Center financed? Where did you come up with the $160,000?
We had a fund drive, and we actually generated $750,000 at that point in time. Gordon Severa, who was an officer down at Northern Natural at that time, was our general chairman. And he put together that program, and we went to Susie Buffett, who was
Bill Thompson's daughter, and asked her and Warren if they would help us. And initially they turned us down, and then but Bill's grandson, Tom Rogers, and he were very tight, and old Bill wanted this very badly. I think he saw Milo Bale with the Student Center, and he felt he should have a name on something here. And so he let it be known to young Tom, who let it be known to Susie, that he wanted his name on that building. And so Warren agreed to provide for us $100,000 if we could get $100,000 in matching money. And we were successful in getting that done, and so we put Dr. William H. Thompson's name on that building. Now, you kind of intimated that there might have been a little competition between Dr. Bale and Dr. Thompson. Is that? I've heard that before. Do you know anything about that?
Well, back in 1947, when Roland Haynes had left the university, and they were looking for a new president, there were 6 people on the board of trustees or board of regents at that time, and they were split apparently. Half of them wanted Bill Thompson as the president, The other half wanted Milo Bale, and the story is told, whether it's true or not, I can't say for sure, but they put V.J. Scott on the board, and he filled the 7th position, and he liked Dr. Bale, and he chose Meade Chamberlain was on our board at that time as an alum, and Meade was down at Mutual of Omaha, and he told me that story, that when Dr. Bale, or when VJ got on the board, he chose Dr. Bale.
Well, we've had some people on back in the old municipal university days who were big names in Omaha politics and in Omaha corporations. Scott was one you just mentioned.
Pete Kiewit.
And Peter Kiewit was another. I remember Peter Kiewit was on the board very well.
Yeah, no, some wonderful people. But that Bill told me later that he felt that he was really blessed that he did not get the presidency here, because that just was not what he was all about. And
now this Alumni Center is now open to the general public, I guess, as a rental facility. You and function rooms and banquets and this sort of thing.
If you have hard, cold, green cash, we'll talk. You don't have to be an alum, and we'll do 50 or 60 wedding receptions in there every year, plus anniversary parties, and a lot of corporations use it. We don't have the downtown center anymore, and so if we had more parking, it would even get more weekly use. But the students are in there, and which is obviously very appropriate. But if we had a little better parking situation.
But it is open to university functions without paying that big rental cost.
Yeah, no, there's we provide that complimentary to any department or individual on campus.
Now, if you'd provide complimentary food service there at the same time, well, that would be very nice.
Yes, yes. Well, we've got Brandeis has the exclusive relationship there.
I know. That's the only complaint I've ever heard about not about that particular caterer, but about the cost of having a meeting or something there when you had to pay for big pots of coffee and stuff that you could brew yourself.
No, I agree, but that's the way it is.
Well, you've hosted lots of functions there, and I guess that forms a major part of the Alumni Association's budget now.
Yeah. Now we'll bring in. I haven't looked at those numbers recently, but it's a big number for us, and without it, I'm sure we'd survive, but it sure makes life a lot easier. And it's just Stan Howe was our architect back in 1979-80 when we got the original home. He was with us when we added on in 1994. We had another campaign back then, raised another $1.2 million to add on to the building to the east, and we've just spent another $1.8 million adding on even more to the south of the building, and it is
I was pleasantly surprised when I saw how great that building looks now with the latest addition.
Yeah, it just really works, and it's very functional, and we can accommodate a lot of people. There's a lot of breakout rooms, and what I love about it is how we've incorporated the old building into the new. It just flows, it fits, and the Shirley family now has agreed to help us financially, so now we're referring to the whole old house as the Shirley wing of the William and Dorothy Thompson Alumni Center, and it's just a nice touch to remember the family that were in there for 55 years.
Yeah, I can remember when one of the rooms you used there used to be a garage.
That was a 3-car garage, and Mrs. Shirley had an old a Cadillac and an old Mercedes that used to set in there, and we named that after Ralph Wardle. And that Ralph, longtime professor here in English and so forth, and I'll never forget John Madden. Probably shouldn't be telling this story, but John gave us $100,000 in Wardle's name. Wanted that club room named after, and he didn't want any publicity. And I asked him if I could tell Ralph and Mary about it, and he agreed that I could. And they were living over here not too far south of the Masonic Manor. And I went over, and I remember them sitting on the couch when I went in and sat down, and I indicated that John had done this in his name, and they didn't say anything, they just cried. They just sat there and the tears just rolled down their faces.
Ralph was interviewed for this series, and I think his wife was with him when he was interviewed, and Paul took a portable camera to their house. And so if you've seen that, you might remember that that's one of the things Paul did quite often was to go to people's houses. Of course, that was nice because you didn't have the expense of a studio then, and just a single camera.
But it was, and now that what we call the club room is gone. When we remodeled, that had to go out, but we still have kept the plaque is over there. And so you can see where it was and so forth. But he was just a tremendous, so many of our alums remember not Paul Borghi, but Ralph, because of the old humanities survey course that we all had to take, and he was a big part of that.
Well, we only have a few minutes left here. Let's talk about some of the other things that you've done. You've really done so many things in your 30-some years as president of the association. You've had all kinds of scholarships, recognitions for people, alumni awards. What's the thing that you've accomplished that you could say you're most proud of?
Oh, it's probably that building, because that gives us an identity that we've never had before. And people, and when you go in and see it being used, Bill Thompson, I think, would be very pleased with how this all turned out. And not only that it sets where it does, and it's so visible, but it fits in beautifully with the campus, and it just gets used in a very positive way by so many people. That's really been a joy. And a lot of alumni associations around the country have built their own facilities, and for the same reasons. And that's just been a wonderful experience for us. But I think the thing that I've found most gratifying is every time we've gone and asked alums to be helpful, the response has been positive. If you can show the benefit that is going to accrue to the university and are willing to work with them, not just go say, do this please, and then get out of the way, but to be there and work hand in glove with them to make those accomplishments.
Well, time's flying by very quickly here, and we have about a minute left, and one of the things I'd like to ask you, I've asked you now what you're most proud of. Let me ask you, what do you think was the most fun of all of the things that you've been doing? You've got 30 seconds.
I really enjoyed those telemarketing efforts that we had, and some of our old homecoming and Hall of Fame experiences were just delightful because we involved so many different people. Anytime you can involve alums in the activities, I think it's exciting and just very gratifying if you're an alumni director.
Well, I wish we had more time, but I'm afraid I'm going to have to say thank you, and I really enjoyed this. We could just go on and on talking about people you've known and things you've done and things that have happened on campus. But right now I need to thank you and to thank our audience for joining us today in a visit with Jim Leslie, for many years the President and CEO of the UNO Alumni Association. We've been taking a look at some of the history of UN Omaha as seen through the eyes of those who have made this history. This is Jack Newton inviting you to join us again in the series we call Reflections in Time.
Reflections in Time is made possible in part by support from the UNO Alumni Association, fostering a legacy of alumni giving since 1913.